Hi, this is Marie from Creations Photography and Design. Today I heard a comment about shading something. I belong to this group that does Photoshop compositing, and one of the guys says, somebody commented to me that this should be shaded, but I really don't know how to do that. And I thought, oh, I think this will be easy. I'm going to make a quick video about how we can shade or change light direction on a stock image. Now this little bee is from Adobe Stock, and I already have, here's how he came originally. And then I extracted him from his background. I masked him out from his background and put in a sky behind him, because after all, where else would a bee be if he weren't flying in the sky? Anyways, so we have this cute little bee. There seems to be light coming from the left side here. As we look a little bit, it seems that this area of his head is a little lighter than this area of his head. We see a catch light here in his eye. Let me zoom in, Control or Command plus. We see the catch light in one eye, not the other. There's not a tremendous amount of difference in lighting on his legs, but we do have those little clues along the edge of his head. So we're saying the light is coming in from, as you look at it, our left, his right. His left wing appears to be a little lighter than his right wings are. So we're taking a clue that this is how this is lit. Well, how do I emphasize that? And there's a couple of different ways we can do that. The first way that I can do that is I can go down here to the FX button and push gradient overlay. I'm going to select a gradient overlay. Now this new Photoshop CC remembers the last one I had, so I'm going to see what happens when I click Restore to Default. This is odd. Oh, I see. And it's using a gray to a white gradient. Well, I don't want gray to white. I want black to white gradient. And once we choose the black to white gradient, we can see now that it's lighter up top and darker at the bottom. Now if we left this just exactly the way it is, the light would be coming from the top and the bottom would be shadowed. But we can do a little bit of wiggling around here. Now I have chosen a linear gradient, and I'm suppose it, whoops, didn't mean to do that. And here we have linear radial. A radial gradient would be darker around the edge, or light, this case, darkness center, light on the edges, unless we reversed it. We could also choose an angle, which doesn't make very realistic shadows, nor does sometimes reflected makes a decent one. And let's lower the scale of that so you can see what that reflection is. A reflection just is basically light coming in from the top and the bottom. But most of the time, whoops, what I want is the linear. Now you can see with the scale I can make the transition very abrupt, or I can scale it up and make it a much subtler transition. Now I'm going to make this just a teeny tiny bit smaller, Command or Control minus. And I'm also going to change the angle. Remember, the light was coming in from our left, so I'm going to change it to where the light is coming in from our left. And I don't really want much white showing. I want it as light as I can get it and still make it gray. So I'm changing the scale a little bit to do that. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, you know, Marie, that just looks horrid. Well, it does until we change the blend mode. And I generally use soft light. And there you go. We have made it more obvious that the light is coming from the left. We can also play with the opacity just a little bit. We can change the opacity, and changing that will make it a little more subtle. Now, if we really want to get rid of all subtlety, you might try changing the blend mode to overlay, which really makes a huge difference. And for some things, you need that. You really do. Again, we can modify it with the opacity, but let's leave it full strength. It'll show up better. Now I'm saying, gee, I can't see his face. Well, the neat thing about most of these styles is you can go right to the image, click on it, and move it around. So now my gradient overlay, I want to move it some, and I'm moving it to the right. So I'm getting more of his face lit up, his eye lit up. And let me show you what that looks like in the normal mode, just because it's easier to see. Now in this case, I'm getting too much white right there, so I'm going to see if I can scale that up a little bit, and then I'll move it over just a little bit more. That looks pretty good. It's all gray, and it's hitting I think we'll hit the face pretty well. So we'll put that back in overlay, and sure enough, we can really see his left side lit up better than his right side. Now, of course, that angle can be changed. We can light him from the bottom. And again, we're going to want to move this probably up a little bit so it's clearly lit from the bottom. We can light him from the top. And again, we'll move it down so where we're clearly lighting from the top. Or if all the rest of the light in our image is coming from the other direction and we don't want to flip-flop him, we could try and see if we could come from his right and see how that goes. And again, we're going to want to move it over. And I'm just judging by eye here what looks good. Now, because he was already lit from the left, we have added another highlight to him. So he's actually lit from both directions. But let's go ahead with our original one over there at 180. We'll move that out to where we see some on his light. We're going to scale that up just a little bit and maybe move it to soft light. Now, soft light is much more subtle. And let's say okay. And we can turn off that gradient overlay on and off. And although it's a subtle difference, you can see that we've done something. And if that's not enough for you, just click on that, double click on that gradient overlay and change that back to overlay from soft light. Now you'll see it's much more overt. And if that's too much, why then you'd go back, double click on gradient overlay and lower that opacity a little bit to where it's better than soft light but not quite as bold as full overlay. Really kind of neat. And because it's adjustable, anytime you click on the words gradient overlay, you can change it to whatever you want. So it's very, very flexible, which is really nice. Now there's another way that I do things, and I don't I don't know as I've seen anybody play with this, but it's what works for me. Again, we have another Adobe stock image, and you can clearly see that this little dog is lit, oh, at least from maybe the front right. He's a little blown out right here, and I probably should change that. Let's see what we can accomplish with a camera raw filter, which I've already applied. And basically I'm going to take the highlights down just a little bit more, and I'm going to take the exposure down just a smidgen. Looks like there's no real cure for that, but we've made it better. So here we go. We've got this little guy, and I'm going to turn him back because you can see his shadow. Originally he was standing next to something, and something was casting a shadow on this side of his face. And we want to add light in there. The rest of him is lit pretty good. And we could, of course, try our gradient overlay. And let's put it back to normal so we can see what we're doing. And let's take this scale down so we can see where we're at. Okay. And then let's get him, soft light. But you know, it's still, actually the opacity is a little bit much. We could move it over a little bit, but even though if we put it into the white area, we could get it almost right, but that shadow still shows. So for this particular dog, the gradient overlay isn't going to work so well as we like. So since I already have this masked off, I'm going to Command or Control click on the layer mask and select the bulldog. Now I'm going to make a layer. Actually, I'm going to make 2 blank layers. I'm going to select them both and put them both in soft light for the moment. And I'm going to name them. I'm going to name this the light shaping, and the next one is going to be the dark shaping. Now in CS6 and above, you can just tab to get to one layer to the next to name it. If you have an earlier version, why then you're going to have to click on each layer as you go. And when you're done, hit enter or return, because if you don't, it'll mess you up and your names will get all sorts of letters from your keyboard shortcuts. Alright, now that I have him here, I'm going to go up to light shaping. I'm going to add light to this. So I want my default colors, black and white, and I want white to be my foreground color. I'm going to grab a brush, keyboard shortcut B, and I want a fairly big brush with a soft edge. And as you can see, I've got a tiny brush. Now you can use your right bracket key to make this bigger, and your left bracket key to make it smaller. In general, I like to cheat with a keyboard shortcut on a Mac, Control Alt. If I slide it left, right it gets bigger, left it gets smaller. If I slide my mouse up while I'm holding it, it gets softer, and if I slide my mouse down, it gets harder. So I want a nice, fairly big, soft brush right here. Now, if you're on a PC, I believe you also have to hold down the right mouse button to get to this shortcut, but I'm not sure, and I should have looked it up before I started. But you can do it, it's 3 buttons instead of 2. So anyways, I've got white and I've got soft light, and basically, actually, so you can see what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say normal for a second. I'm gonna come over here and brush the shadow, just in the shadow area. Now that looks just horrid, but when I put it on soft light, it looks much better. And remember, I'm keeping that nice soft edge so we don't have any hard edges anywhere. And that may be a little bit too much, so we just lower the opacity of that layer. And now it isn't so obvious that he's got a shadow there. Well, as long as we're playing around with that, we ought to shadow here along the side of his nose, and if there's light coming from the left, we ought to shadow the front of both of his legs, right? And probably his toes. And of course, this little part of his ear will need a little light on it, as would, oh gosh, maybe a little corner of this eyebrow. And if you really wanted to push it, each one of his wrinkles would need some light coming from the left. Now here you notice I'm making my brush a little bit smaller so I can get each one of those wrinkles and light one side of them. Now I'm trying to keep this really subtle, but remember this, if the light were coming from our left, all of these things would probably be lit fairly well. Just think about the light, where it's coming from, and where it would touch. Now let me show you. Now this is what I've done. It's really subtle, but it's still there. Now let's go down to dark shaping and click the keyboard shortcut X to bring black to our foreground. Now in this case, if he were lit from, whoops, don't want to do that. If he were lit from the left, he would be a little darker along this side. And of course the opacity of that is way too much. So I'm going to take the opacity down quite a ways. And then make my brush smaller, and remember we'd have to brush along the back of his leg here and along the parts of the wrinkles that were light before need to be darkened. Now you could also do this by making a blank layer and filling it with 50% gray, changing the blend mode to soft light, and painting on it with black and white. You could also do that same. I generally put the black and white on different layers simply because I find it easier to control. Sometimes I don't need as much dark as I do light. The opacity is generally a little bit different. So here, let's show you that. Now I've added all these dark areas in here. Maybe I should add a little dark right in here, and probably right in here behind his ear. So you can see the dark and the light. And now that I'm done, and the reason I put the selection is so I wouldn't get, if I don't have the selection there, I can paint anywhere instead of just inside the selection. And I should have said that before I started, but I didn't. So let's Control or Command D to get rid of that selection and flip that shaping on and off. And you can get just as detailed as you want. Does it help? Well, we can certainly see a difference, and it looks like the light is coming from a different direction. Do we need all the dark? Maybe we would just be happy with the light shaping here. But generally, if I do light shaping, I do dark shaping. And see, and I've run that down to about 38%, while our light shaping is 78%. Maybe a little less. So it does make a difference. And I've done this just real quickly. You can take as long as you want to do this, and you can really make a portrait of anything pop if you take the time to not change the direction of the light, but add a soft light white brush in the light areas to emphasize those, and a soft light, or a soft light black soft brush in the shadows that are already there, and that makes a tremendous difference on how realistic this looks. And one thing I think I really need to do here is zoom in this poor little sad sack. I need to change back to white, give him a little bit better highlight in his eyes. And maybe not. But nonetheless, you can see how making a selection and painting inside that selection with black and white can help you nudge the direction of light around a little bit, or emphasize what was already there. So thanks for listening, and I hope you really enjoyed it. And now I have to figure out how to shut this thing off.